to this service in memory of John and Alicia Nash. Their lives were long, very full, and still. Our gathering today is tinged with sorrow, but we had hoped to have them with us much longer. Not sadness, though, but appreciation, gratitude, honor, and celebration are what convene us now as we remember such gifts of human intelligence, friendship, and perseverance. The bonds of family and collegiality are changed by death, but they are not ended, and a lifetime's contributions to knowledge only grow from more to more, and so is a human life enriched. Our deep thanks to each of you for your presence here today as we remember and celebrate two extraordinary persons. The first appreciation comes from President of Princeton University, Chris Eisgruber, and will be read by Dr.
It's a privilege for me to be able to read this letter from Princeton University President Christopher L. Eisgruber to the family, friends, and colleagues of John and Alicia Nash. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to share a few words in honor of John and Alicia Nash, beloved members of the Princeton University community. While I cannot be with you in person, please know that my heart and my thoughts are with all who joined together today to celebrate two genuinely legendary members of the Princeton community. John was a gifted and luminous mathematician. None of you need me to tell you that. Others will testify to his genius more knowledgeably and eloquently than I could. And in any event, you have his Nobel Prize and his Olive Prize as incontestable evidence of his extraordinary achievement. Nor do you need me to tell you about the unforgettable, nearly mythical lives that he and Alicia lived. Again, you will hear from people who knew John and Alicia far better than I did. And in any event, you have a marvelous biography and a blockbuster Hollywood movie to recount their stories. I hope, therefore, that you will permit me to share some more personal remembrances, modest and unimportant though they may be. I first encountered John Nash when I was an undergraduate here during the 1980s. I have not the faintest idea who he was. He was in the depths of his schizophrenia, and he was a ghostly and, to a young student, mysterious presence around Fine Hall, where I frequently studied. I can still remember the sense of pure, gobsmacked astonishment that I experienced when, more than a decade after my graduation, I saw John's picture in connection with the news of his Nobel Prize. His story was almost too incredible to be believed. That story touched many people. When John and Alicia died, I received notes of condolence sent to Princeton University from around the globe, from academics and alumni, from sultans and socialites, from people who would not ordinarily take an interest in the life or death of a mathematician, even one who was a Nobel laureate. The world felt a personal connection to John and Alicia Nash, and people around the globe felt a personal loss when they died so suddenly. Through the magnificence of John's achievements, their shared courage in the face of his illness, and the many unexpected turns in their remarkable lives, John and Alicia embodied for millions of people both the exhilaration of human aspiration and the sorrow of human tragedy. Of course, in this community, we knew John and Alicia more personally
25th, I had the pleasure and privilege as President of the Norwegian Academy of Science and Letters to announce the laureates of the Abel Prize in Mathematics 2015. The board of the Academy had decided to award the Abel Prize for 2015 to John Forbes Nash Jr. and Louis Nierenberg for their striking and seminal contributions to the theory of nonlinear partial differential equation and its application to geometric analysis. On May 19th, Nash and Nierenberg received the Abel Prize from His Majesty King Harald V at a prize ceremony that attracted great publicity. In the evening, the Norwegian government hosted a dinner to celebrate the laureates. The celebration continued the next 2 days with lectures, the first day at the University of Oslo, and the day after with lectures at the University of Bergen. The lecture halls at both universities were full of people who wanted to listen to the laureates. It was a splendid and memorable Abel Prize week for all of us who had the pleasure to be close to the laureates and participate in the events both in Oslo and Bergen. However, when we received the news 2 days later that John Forbes Nash and Alicia Nash were killed in a car accident, it was a tremendous shock for the whole academy and the mathematical community around. It is deeply tragic that John and Alicia Nash passed away on their journey home from the Abel Prize week in Norway. For me personally, it was a great pleasure and honor to get to know John and Alicia Nash during the events at the Abel Prize week in Oslo and Bergen. The last day in Oslo, after the end of the official program, I expected that John and Alicia Nash would like to rest at the hotel. It had been a very busy week, but they wanted to visit the Munch Museum, the museum of the most famous Norwegian painter, Edvard Munch, and they asked me to join them. Visiting the Munch Museum together with them was a memorable experience. We spent 2 hours in the museum and I studied the picture with great interest. I will always remember John Nash's intense studying, not the most famous pictures such as the Scream, but the more modest lithographs. What did he try to find? Back at the hotel, we said goodbye. The last words to me were, "If you ever come to Princeton, please visit us." On behalf of the Norwegian Academy, we fondly remember John and Alicia Nash.
I hope you can hear me. I first heard about John when my senior colleague, Kurt Friedrichs, gave me a copy of his paper on the smooth isometric embedding of Riemannian manifold into Euclidean space. Of course, we heard a lot about his work this morning and afternoon. And I read the paper very carefully and with enormous awe. And I must say, whatever of his work that I read, and I didn't read very much, I always had the feeling, God, I would never have thought of that. It was just, each time I felt that. I remember also, I was told that Friedrichs also urged that John get the Fields Medal, but that never happened, unfortunately. He well deserved it, as we all know. And I finally met him when he had, I think it was 1955 or 56, when he had a year's leave from MIT here at Princeton, I guess at the Institute. But he spent a lot of time in New York City, and he came often to New York University, where I have been many years, and we talked mathematics very often and became friends. Although I must say, we didn't become close friends. We never became close friends. I saw him mainly during that year, and afterwards not very much. He was always a bit withdrawn, and I always had the feeling that, not always, but often I had the feeling that he had a sort of slight smile on his face, as though he was amused by some inner joke that he wouldn't tell me or anybody else. Sorry, my vision is poor, so I'm trying to read what I wrote, and even I cannot read what I wrote. So during that year, he asked me for if I could suggest some interesting problem that he might work on. He always looked for difficult problems. And I suggested a problem, one of the problems that was discussed this morning by Sergio Kleinerman, about regularity. It was a very old problem posed by Hilbert, regularity of solutions of elliptic variational problems. And it's a problem I had worked on and got nowhere. And I thought, well, maybe he might get somewhere with it. And during the year, he came often, not often, but several times, he came to ask me questions related to what he was trying with a problem. So he would ask me, for instance, could the following inequality be true? And he would write some inequality on the blackboard. And sometimes I pointed out that they weren't true. Some of them I didn't know, but sometimes I said, no, that's not true, and I gave a counterexample. And so I felt that he was getting nowhere with the problem. And in fact, Lennart Carlsson, who was at the Institute for Advanced Study, told me he had a similar experience with Nash during that year. But in the end, he did solve the problem. Of course, as we know, a most remarkable solution. And then he discovered that it had been solved a bit earlier, it had been published a bit earlier by a very young Italian mathematician named Ennio De Giorgi. He asked me if I knew him, and at that time I didn't know him. Later, De Giorgi became a very well-known and eminent mathematician. And I must say, he was upset. John was upset by the fact that somebody had sort of beat him to it. Although the case that he handled was, as pointed out this morning, more general case involving time, not only space. And then I saw him again, around 1956, we both went to a geometry meeting in Seattle. And there he spoke about the paper. And I was a bit surprised when before his talk, he asked me what parts of the paper he should present. I thought, well, he's the expert, why is he asking me? But anyway, I made some suggestion, and he actually followed that suggestion. And then we didn't meet again, he became ill, as you know, and we met briefly in Paris. I think it was 1961. There was a mathematics conference, and he showed up one day, and he spoke to me about giving up his US citizenship. But then during the rest of his illness, I saw him very seldom. I would sometimes when I visited Princeton and visited the university, I would run into him around the library, the math library, and I always went up and spoke to him. And I think sometimes he remembered me, although not always. He spoke very little. He would say something about the sad fares of the world and what he could do about some problems in Spain. And also I sometimes went to lunch at the Institute for Advanced Study, and he regularly had lunch there. And whenever I was there, I would go and sit with him, and we would eat together, and I think there he did remember me. And, sorry, I'm just, last fall, I didn't see him again until last fall. The French Cultural Center in New York organized a conversation between John Nash and a French mathematician, Cedric Villani. There was a person who asked them both questions. And John didn't speak much, but his answers were very good and with a touch of humor, I must say. It was rather charming. After the conversation was over, I went up to him and we chatted for a while, and he told me he had some ideas about relativity theory. Wasn't sure he would publish them, he didn't know what people would think of them, and I suggested that he put them in the archive. That's an internet kind of publication before papers are published in a journal. And he did that, as I learned later. And then I didn't see him until we met again in Oslo in May at the time of the Abel Prize. And he and Alicia were rather tired the first couple of days, but then they perked up, and I must say it was a wonderful week for all of us, for them and for my wife and myself. It was absolutely a wonderful experience. Everyone was extremely kind and warm, and I think they enjoyed it. John and Alicia enjoyed it enormously. We flew back together from Oslo, and it turns out our flight had been canceled, and they put us on a different flight, and so there was nobody to meet us at the airport in Newark. And I managed to contact my daughter, who showed up an hour later. And so for that hour, Alicia and John and I were just chatting in a very friendly way, and they were in very good spirits. And then finally they decided they'll take a taxi, and the horrible tragedy occurred. And I still find it hard to believe that they're not alive. And I must say they're in my thoughts very often. And I don't know what else to say.
Alicia Nash was born in El Salvador and moved to the U.S. in 1944. After graduating high school, she was accepted at MIT and graduated in 1955 with a Bachelor's of Science in Physics. She was one of 16 women and about 800 men to graduate that year. Alicia met John while he taught at MIT. She always wore her MIT brass rat, the school ring. Alicia worked to support the family and finally retired from New Jersey Transit when she was in her late 60s, where she was a computer programmer and data analyst. In addition to financial support, the Nash family would not have survived without her tenacious strength and courage, and the world would never have known John's survival and partial recovery from mental illness. Her support, strength, and courage was not only for her family, John and their son Johnny, but also she showed a similar level of caring and support for Eva Browder, a fellow MIT graduate and longtime friend, visiting regularly after her stroke and even following Eva's loss of memory with concern about her care. She truly knew what friendship was. Alicia and John served as inspiration to many. Alicia's advocacy for the mentally ill is well known. Both she and John gave back to the mental health community, both here and abroad, by showing up at fundraisers and giving short speeches. Alicia even joined Toastmasters, in part to help do this work. Her work also extended to the support that she showed to friends, such as providing information about resources, as well as introductions to people in the mental health community. Her steadfast support for John and Johnny, both with schizophrenia, is credited with keeping their lives together and allowing John to receive the accolades that he deserved. Alicia's supported aspirations of new MIT students as well. One of our members' daughters, after being admitted to MIT, was counseled by Alicia about knowing calculus before studying mechanics, because she had been in that position, taking physics course without knowing calculus, and thus felt its importance as a prerequisite for the physics class. Alicia was one of the sweetest people we knew. Some of our alumni, in discussions with Alicia, had the feeling that she was their primary link in the 6 degrees of separation to the world. She once told a story about their attendance at a United Nations event for recipients of the Nobel Prize. She was describing a conversation and stated, "And so I told Kofi." The alum interrupted, "Wait, you mean Kofi Annan?" She said, "Yes, of course." Alicia was an integral part of the MIT Club of Princeton. She served as president for 2 terms in the late 1990s and served on the Board of Supervisors at the time of their passing, as she had been for over 30 years. John and Alicia always attended our social events, our summer picnic, our holiday party, and frequently attended our happy hour, often with John, partially, we think, because she did not like to cook. Alicia was our primary support in acquiring venues within the Princeton University campus. This made our event planning activities much smoother. Alicia would lunch and dine with members of the board, keeping the social fabric of the club alive and interesting. John would frequently join her. John was a quiet person. Alicia was the outgoing one. We loved it when they joined us. In 2015, with the winning of the Abel Prize, the MIT Club of Princeton planned, with Alicia's help, a celebration of the award that included a reshowing of A Beautiful Mind. John and Alicia were to be present at this event and the dinner afterwards, but tragically they lost their lives on the return trip from the airport after attending the Abel Prize award ceremony. The celebration for John and Alicia became a tribute. It was held just after their passing. Instead of John and Alicia being physically present, they were represented by a short film made on the Princeton University campus by the Abel Prize organization. In the film, John is interviewed in various settings and is shown walking on the Princeton campus ahead of Alicia. A poignant moment is when he turns to make sure that Alicia is all right and is with him. This scene suggests that Alicia and John were destined to always be together.
How rare a privilege it is to be able to see firsthand the workings of an extraordinary mind. Equally, it was a privilege for our family to become part of Alicia and John's extended family and friends, which was very large and far from monolithic. The Nashes were extraordinarily loyal friends. I was lucky to have John Nash for a full year for freshman calculus in the academic year 1957-58 at MIT. One day, before the start of class, one of the chemistry brains in class brought in nitrogen triiodide crystals, which are shock sensitive. He spread these on the floor in front of the blackboard. Several minutes later, Dr. Nash walks in, takes one step, pow. Nash swings around, and in the smallest particle of a second imaginable, points a finger at the class, exclaiming, triiodide. Sitting there in my seat, I remember thinking that now I was in another league. In high school, this kind of thing would have caused confusion and turmoil and infinite discussion, but here, in the twinkling of an eye, it was all over. Later, living in Princeton and through the MIT Alumni Club, I became friends with Alicia. Alicia was a woman of unshakable faith, a steady friend. And without exaggeration, I would have missed half of the meetings and events that I was supposed to attend had it not been for Alicia reminding me. She was really the gyroscope of the family, but always ready for a party, with John not very far behind. Through Alicia, I became friends with John. On the passing of my beloved wife, Patty, almost 10 years ago now, John wrote me this email. There's not much that can be said except for all the known sayings in human history. I'm struck now by the thought of how you've become a widower and may suffer by being alone in a house. We are hoping that you all will be able to make the needed adjustments to continue in the human existence, which is always ended by mortality. The most striking thing about Professor Nash's math class was the precise use of the English language. I had never heard the language used with such clarity. Shortly after John had received the Nobel Prize, he and Alicia were over for dessert. Patty was passing out slices of cake. Alicia, on seeing her piece, said, "That's too big for me." John observed with a sympathetic smile that the slice wasn't too big for Alicia, but was too big for her diet. This is a small example of the degree of precision in his thinking. John had many happy lunches with his good friend, economics professor Nash. At one of those lunches, I mentioned to John that my piano teacher was expecting and that the due date was that day, the day of my lesson, in fact. John said he thought if the birth occurred, it would take precedence over the piano lesson. I was hard put to offer a counter argument. So, if we go back to the academic year 1957-58, we have my classmate reminding me, don't you remember you had to go to Nash's class with a pocket full of colored pens? John would come to class and extract a box of colored chalk from his jacket pocket. The MIT math department was too cheap to buy colored chalk. He would take off his jacket and swing it over a very sturdy, large black teacher's chair in front of the classroom and begin to present freshman math with crystal clarity and with a faint flickering of a southern twang we now know traceable to Bluefield on the southern border of West Virginia. Our good friends Alicia and John, God bless them.
President Bull and Professor Nuremberg and David. It's quite an experience to be here, seeing you all, and I want to thank you all for being here. I prepared a speech I'd like to read. I will always remember the moment that Sunday, May 24th morning, when my father's faithful friend Jim Manganaro called to tell me about the horrible accident on the New Jersey Turnpike. The deaths of my father and stepmother Alicia were made even more impossible to comprehend, coming on the heels of an incredible high point event such as the Nobel Prize award ceremony in Oslo, Norway. It was 7 years ago, while here at Princeton University for a different event, the Nash at 80 birthday celebration, that I met a fair number of my father's great friends and colleagues. Sadly, some of those people are now gone or cannot be here tonight. My father lived through and directly experienced some of the most important events in our nation's modern history. And when I think of him, it's plain to see why my father chose Princeton University and the surrounding community to be his home, permanent home. Here is the place where he was always accepted, never criticized, and was allowed to be himself. When offered the opportunity to speak on this occasion, I happened to think about my mother, Eleanor, and the advice she once gave me when preparing for an interview. She said, "Don't worry, John, they are only people." This sort of simple wisdom and the memories and moments spent with our loved ones hopefully stays with us throughout our lives. There are many memories of such moments that could be shared of times I spent with my father and Alicia. The most important thing I can say here to sum up all the good and bad times we shared is that I love them both. I believe the last 20 or so years of my father and Alicia's lives were very good ones, both as a couple and individually. Alicia was able to retire after many years of working as a primary breadwinner for the family. And fortunately, my dad had recovered enough not only to accept his Nobel Prize in 1994, but also resume organized work in mathematics, appear as a distinguished speaker and contributor in the fields of game theory, economics, and mental health, and fulfill all the duties of his appointment as a senior research mathematician here in the math department of Princeton University. I can assure you that he took these responsibilities very seriously, and I was proud of him.
Profoundest thanks again to every one of you for your presence here, and especially to our speakers for all that they have shared. As we pursue our own busy lives, may the memory of John and Alicia Nash spur in us all a deeper commitment to the pursuit of what is truthful, to integrity, to understanding and compassion for any who suffer, and to the welfare
of all persons. May peace be upon them and upon us all.